Jake and Ryan were not just business partners. They were best friends. They had known each other since childhood, growing up in the same small town. Their friendship had been through thick and thin, and they shared countless memories of long nights talking about their dreams. From a young age, they always talked about building something big together. They were both ambitious, but they didn't want to just follow the usual paths everyone took. They wanted to create something that would change the world. One evening, while they were both in their 20s, they sat in Ryan's messy living room, tossing around ideas. The air was thick with excitement. Jake, who had always been good with numbers and people, had the idea to start a tech company. He loved the idea of building something from scratch and taking it global. Ryan, on the other hand, was a genius when it came to coding. He could build anything. His passion for technology ran deep, and he had a vision of creating products that would truly improve people's lives. It wasn't just talk. They made it happen. With a small loan from family and friends, they officially launched Innovatech. Their plan was simple: create tech products that were both innovative and accessible. But more than that, they wanted to create a company that felt different, something that didn't just run for profit, but also cared about people and the world around them. They would be a company that was ethical, that supported its employees, and that valued creativity over just making money. At first, things were tough. Like any startup, they faced countless challenges. They had a small team, limited resources, and a ton of competition. Jake spent his days reaching out to potential investors, working to build the business side of things, while Ryan spent hours coding and developing the first product. They lived on instant noodles, didn't take vacations, and worked through sleepless nights. Their bond grew stronger through every hurdle they faced. But slowly, things began to change. Their first product, a simple but effective project management tool, was a hit. They couldn't believe it. The orders started coming in, and with that, investors took notice. Soon, they were getting meetings with some of the biggest names in the tech industry. They felt like they were on top of the world. For the first time, it felt like their dream was becoming a reality. As the company grew, so did their influence. Innovatech began to hire more employees, expand its product range, and open new offices. They had created something special, and people were starting to take them seriously. Their team grew, and the work became more intense. The pressure of running a fast-growing startup was beginning to show, but Jake and Ryan continued to work as a team, supporting each other. However, something was changing. As they expanded, so did their responsibilities, and with those came new challenges. They had to make bigger decisions, and each one came with more risk. But it wasn't just the business that was growing. Their differences, too, were beginning to show. What once was a shared dream was slowly turning into a place where each of them had different visions of how to take Innovatech to the next level. Little did they know, this shift would lead them down a path they never expected. For the first few years, Innovatech was a small but determined company, and Jake and Ryan gave it everything they had. They didn't just want to succeed, they wanted to make a real impact. Their first big break came when a well-known tech company showed interest in their project management tool. It wasn't a huge deal yet, but it was enough to get them noticed. Slowly, more and more companies started using their product, and their reputation grew. As the company gained attention, things started moving faster. More investors wanted to be part of the success. Jake, who had a natural talent for building relationships, worked hard to secure funding. He spent hours on calls, pitching their idea to anyone who would listen. Ryan, on the other hand, was always glued to his computer screen, fine-tuning the product and developing new features that made Innovatech stand out from its competitors. They were a perfect team, Jake on the business side, Ryan on the tech side. Soon, they moved into a bigger office. They hired more staff, expanding the team to include designers, marketers, and other developers. With a larger team and more resources, they started working on bigger projects. They weren't just creating products anymore. They were building a whole ecosystem. Their products were being used by thousands of businesses, and the buzz around their company was growing louder every day. They were invited to top industry conferences and panels, where they spoke about their journey and the future of tech. The media started covering their story. People loved their passion, their drive, and their vision for the future. The world could see that Innovatech wasn't just another startup. It was something special. But with success came new pressures. The small team that once worked together like a family began to grow into a large corporation, with a more complex structure and more people to manage. Jake and Ryan's roles became more demanding. As CEO, Jake was often caught up in meetings, negotiating with investors, and making sure the company's financials were on track. Ryan, as the head of product development, spent long hours working with his tech team to keep pushing the boundaries of what their products could do. They had less and less time to connect with each other. The friendship that had once been the foundation of Innovatech was starting to feel distant. Jake began to take on more of the leadership role, becoming more focused on the business side of things. He started making decisions without consulting Ryan as much. At the same time, Ryan felt like the company was losing the passion and creativity it once had. He believed they were focusing too much on scaling the business and not enough on creating truly innovative products. He missed the early days when they would stay up all night, working on something just because they were excited about it. Even though the company was thriving, there was a growing sense that something wasn't quite right. The two friends, who had built Innovatech together, were starting to see their visions pull them in different directions. The gap between their ideas was widening, but neither of them knew exactly how to fix it. What had once felt like a dream team was now becoming a partnership that was starting to crack. The pressure of success was beginning to take its toll, and neither Jake nor Ryan was ready to admit that their friendship and their company was facing its toughest challenge yet. As Innovatech grew, so did the pressure. The company was doing well financially, but internally things were becoming harder to manage. Jake and Ryan were still close friends, but their differences were starting to show. They had always been able to talk through problems, but now, with the business growing so fast, there wasn't much time for those honest conversations. Instead of sharing ideas and discussing things like they used to, they found themselves in more and more heated arguments. Jake's focus had shifted almost entirely to growing the company. As CEO, he was responsible for keeping the investors happy and making sure the company expanded at the right pace. His goal was to scale Innovatech quickly, take on bigger clients, and increase profits. He believed that the company needed to become bigger to survive in the competitive tech world. He started pushing the team harder, focusing on efficiency, cutting costs, and making bold moves to outpace competitors. Ryan, on the other hand, had a very different vision. While he understood the need for growth, he was concerned that the company was losing its original spark. Ryan loved creating new, groundbreaking products. But as Innovatech expanded, he felt that the focus was shifting away from innovation and more toward business strategies and numbers. He wanted to build products that would change the way people worked and lived, not just products that would make the company more money. The tension between them started to show during a critical product launch. Jake wanted to push forward with the new version of their flagship software, which he believed was essential for keeping the company competitive. He felt that they couldn't afford to delay it any longer. Ryan, however, wasn't happy with the new version. He believed it wasn't ready and that it didn't live up to the company's original vision. Ryan wanted to spend more time on improving the product, making sure it was perfect before releasing it. But Jake was under pressure and wanted results fast. The disagreement became intense. They both stood their ground, with Jake insisting that speed was the key to success, and Ryan arguing that quality should come first. For the first time, they were openly at odds, and neither was willing to back down. The team could feel the tension in the air. It wasn't just a disagreement about a product. It was a deeper conflict about what the company stood for and what kind of leaders they were. Things got worse when Jake started making decisions without consulting Ryan. He began bringing in outside advisors and making strategic moves that Ryan didn't agree with. Ryan, feeling left out, became frustrated and even a little bitter. He felt like his voice no longer mattered in the company he had helped build. At the same time, Jake was frustrated too. He couldn't understand why Ryan wasn't supporting him more. He believed that without the company growing, it wouldn't survive. And that meant making tough calls. The tipping point came when Ryan sent an email expressing his concerns. In it, he told Jake that he felt their friendship and their vision for the company were no longer aligned. He felt like Jake was turning Innovatitech into something it was never meant to be, a big business instead of a company driven by creativity and passion. Jake, hurt and shocked by the email, felt like Ryan was questioning his ability to lead. It became clear to him that their partnership wasn't working anymore. Neither of them could see a way out of the conflict. The once inseparable duo had reached a breaking point, and the tension had reached a level where it was impossible to ignore. They both knew that something had to change, but neither was willing to make the first move. Innovatech was at a crossroads, and so was their friendship. Jake had never imagined that he would be in a situation where he had to make such a tough decision. Firing Ryan, his best friend, and the co-founder of Innovatech, was something he had never planned for. But after weeks of arguing, frustration, and feeling like they were no longer on the same page, Jake knew something had to change. It wasn't just about their friendship anymore. Jake felt that the future of Innovatech was at risk. The company had grown to a point where it needed strong leadership to keep it moving forward. Jake was determined to take the company to the next level, but Ryan's constant opposition was starting to slow things down. Ryan's insistence on focusing purely on innovation, while admirable, was holding back the company's growth. Jake believed that they needed a more business-driven approach to compete with the giants in the tech world. The breaking point came when Jake, after consulting with a few of the board members, made the decision that Ryan should be let go. He was the CEO, after all, and his job was to make the hard decisions that would keep the company on track. While the board agreed with Jake, they were all uneasy about firing a co-founder, especially one who had been so vital to the company's success. But they also understood that without changes, Innovatech could stagnate, and no one wanted that. Jake tried to prepare himself for what was coming. He kept going over everything in his mind, wondering if there was another way to handle it. Could they salvage their friendship? Could they find a middle ground? But deep down, Jake knew that this was the only option. The tension between them had become too much. The constant arguments and feelings of betrayal were affecting the company's morale, and Jake feared that if this continued, the business they had built together would fall apart. When Jake finally called Ryan into his office, he could tell that Ryan already knew something was wrong. There was a coldness in the air that hadn't been there before. Ryan had been distant for weeks, and Jake could see the hurt in his eyes. Jake, trying to stay professional despite the emotional weight of the situation, explained that the company needed to move in a different direction. He told Ryan that the board and he had decided it was time for him to leave Innovatech. Ryan was shocked, and for a moment, the room was silent. He had worked so hard to build Innovatech, and now it was all falling apart. He couldn't believe that his best friend was telling him to go. The words stung, but Ryan didn't say much. He had always been more of a quiet thinker, and now his mind was racing. He couldn't understand how things had gotten so bad. Wasn't this the company they had built together? Wasn't their friendship stronger than this? The conversation was brief, and although Jake tried to be compassionate, Ryan walked out of the office with his head down. He didn't argue. He didn't fight it. He just left. But deep down, he knew that this was the end of something much bigger than just a job. It was the end of a chapter in his life that he never thought would close this way. After Ryan left, Jake sat in his office alone. It was a relief in one way, but also a crushing blow in another. He had made the decision that was best for the company, but in doing so, he had lost his best friend. The weight of it was heavy. Jake knew that there was no going back now. Innovatech would have to move on without Ryan, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made one of the hardest choices of his life. The days after the firing were a blur for Ryan. He felt like his world had crumbled overnight. One minute, he had been working alongside his best friend, building something they both believed in. And the next, he was out of the company they had created together. There were no harsh words during the meeting, just a quiet understanding that their paths were now separate. But that didn't make it any easier for Ryan. Ryan spent the first few days in shock. He didn't know what to do or where to turn. The company had been his life for so long, and now it was gone. He didn't just lose a job. He lost a part of himself. The worst part was that he had always been driven by the idea of making something special, something meaningful. Now, he felt like that dream had been taken away from him. It wasn't just about the product. It was about what he and Jake had built together. The trust they shared, the late nights spent brainstorming, the promises they made to each other, it all felt like it was slipping away. For the first time in years, Ryan found himself questioning everything. Was it his fault? Had he been too stubborn? Maybe Jake had been right about the direction of the company. Maybe the focus on growth and scaling was the right thing to do after all. But deep down, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that something important had been lost. The company was no longer about innovation and passion. It was about numbers, profits, and expanding to meet the expectations of investors. Ryan didn't want to be bitter, but it was hard not to feel betrayed. He had given so much of himself to Innovatech, and now it felt like Jake had thrown it all away. Ryan stopped taking calls from mutual friends and colleagues. He didn't want to talk about the firing. He just wanted space to think, to process everything. But that silence was deafening. At first, Ryan tried to start something new. He wanted to prove to himself that he could still create something amazing, that his ideas still had value. But the motivation wasn't the same. He was no longer in that creative zone, the one that had made him excited to wake up every day and build new things. The fire that had once burned brightly inside him now felt like a flicker, barely there. The doubts crept in. Was he still capable of doing something great? Or had he simply been lucky when he was with Innovatech? Ryan's personal life also started to feel the weight of everything. He distanced himself from friends and family. He didn't know how to explain to them what had happened. The people who had supported him through thick and thin now saw him as someone who had failed. Ryan couldn't even look at himself in the mirror without feeling the sting of disappointment. It wasn't just the firing that hurt. It was the loss of the dream he had shared with Jake. But as the weeks went by, Ryan began to pull himself together. He took a step back and realized that he needed to find his own way. The company was gone, but that didn't mean he was. He had the skills, the ideas, and the experience. Maybe this was just a new chapter in his life, one that he had to write on his own terms. Slowly, Ryan started thinking about what he wanted to do next. He began to look at the tech world through a different lens. It wasn't about proving anything to Jake or anyone else. It was about finding his own voice again. And then, something shifted. Ryan had an idea for a new project, something completely different from what he had worked on before. It was small at first, just a rough concept in his mind, but it gave him something to focus on. He could feel the excitement coming back. Maybe, just maybe, there was still hope for him to build something special again. As time passed, Ryan slowly started to rebuild his life. The pain of being fired was still there, but he could feel the edges of it dulling with each passing day. He began to focus on his new project, a fresh idea that felt different from anything he had worked on before. It wasn't just about creating another product. This time, it was about making something meaningful to him, something he truly believed in. He didn't need Jake's approval or the validation of Innovatech to feel proud of his work. Ryan was starting to understand that his worth wasn't tied to the company or to his old friendship. He had value, no matter what happened. But even as he moved forward, Jake's presence lingered in the background. Ryan couldn't completely escape the reality of their past. The company they had built together, the shared dream, and the friendship that had once been unbreakable still weighed on him. Deep down, Ryan knew that he wasn't fully ready to close the door on that chapter. He had questions, and a part of him wondered if there was any way to salvage their friendship. Could they ever go back to the way things were? Or had the damage been done? Jake, too, was struggling. While he had made the decision to fire Ryan in the name of Innovatech's future, the decision didn't feel as clear-cut as he had hoped. The guilt never fully left him. Jake had been so focused on the company's growth that he hadn't considered the personal cost of his actions. He had lost his best friend, the one person who had shared in the highs and lows of building the company. He thought back to the early days, when everything had been simpler, when they had been a true team. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that, in his pursuit of success, he had lost something far more valuable. It wasn't long before Jake reached out to Ryan. The message was short but direct. "We need to talk." At first, Ryan wasn't sure what to expect. He hadn't spoken to Jake since the day he was fired. Was Jake reaching out to apologize? Or was it just about business? Ryan wasn't sure he was ready for another emotional conversation, but there was a small part of him that wanted to hear Jake's side. He agreed to meet up. When they finally sat down together, there was an awkwardness in the air. The once easy conversations they had shared were now replaced with an uncomfortable silence. But after a few moments, Jake spoke up. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," he began. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted to tell you that firing you wasn't easy. I thought it was the right decision for the company, but I regret it. I miss what we had. I miss the old days." Ryan listened carefully, but a part of him was still guarded. He had spent so much time being angry and hurt that it wasn't easy to just let go of those feelings. But hearing Jake's words, seeing the remorse in his eyes, Ryan felt a shift inside. It wasn't a quick fix, and it wasn't about going back to how things were, but there was something comforting in knowing that Jake didn't just see him as another business decision. He had been, and still was, his friend. They talked for hours, about the past, about what went wrong, and about the future. There were no promises made, no plans to work together again. Just a mutual understanding that they had both been changed by what had happened. But for the first time in a long while, Ryan felt like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He could breathe again. Maybe their friendship wouldn't be the same, but there was hope. It wasn't too late to find a way forward, even if it meant walking separate paths. Jake and Ryan may never fully rebuild what they had, but in that moment, they both realized that there was more to life than business. The lesson was clear. Success was important, but it wasn't everything. Sometimes, the people you lose along the way are the ones who matter most. Months passed since Jake and Ryan's heart-to-heart conversation. Though their friendship wasn't what it used to be, there was a quiet understanding between them. They had both made peace with the fact that they had grown in different directions, but that didn't mean they had to completely erase their past. They had shared something special, and even if it couldn't be fully rebuilt, it didn't mean it had to be forgotten. Jake continued to lead Innovatech, taking the company to new heights. The changes he had implemented were paying off. The company had grown into a major player in the tech world, attracting attention from industry giants and gaining recognition for its innovative approach to business. Jake had made the hard decisions, but now, looking at the company's success, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the choices he had made. Was it all worth it? In some ways, yes. The business was thriving, but a part of him still wondered if he had sacrificed too much along the way. Ryan, on the other hand, had found his own path. His new project, born out of frustration and self-doubt, began to gain momentum. It wasn't as big or flashy as Innovatech, but it was his. It was grounded in his vision and creativity, something that was driven by passion rather than business metrics. Ryan had learned a lot about himself in the months since he left the company. He realized that he didn't need to be part of a giant corporation to feel successful. He could build something meaningful on his own, at his own pace. One day, out of the blue, Ryan received a message from Jake. It wasn't a business proposition or a request for help. It was an invitation to meet. Jake wanted to catch up, to see how Ryan was doing, and to talk about what had happened between them. At first, Ryan hesitated. Was this just another attempt to patch things up, or was it something deeper? But curiosity got the best of him. He agreed to meet. When they sat down at a quiet cafe, the atmosphere was different. There was no tension or unresolved bitterness. It felt like two old friends catching up, but with the understanding that they had both changed. Jake spoke first. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, Ryan," he said. "I realize now that there were moments I should have handled better. I don't know if we'll ever go back to how we were, but I'm glad you're doing well." Ryan smiled, not because everything was fixed, but because it felt like a real step forward. "I've learned a lot too," he replied. "It hasn't been easy, but I've found my own way. It's different, but it's mine." They didn't try to make grand promises to work together again, or to rebuild their old friendship from scratch. Instead, they agreed that they both had their own journeys to take. They were different people now, shaped by the experiences they had gone through. But the respect was still there. They both knew that they had helped each other become who they were today. As they parted ways that day, there was no dramatic goodbye, no tearful moment. Just two people who had once shared a dream, who had lost it, but had found their own ways to keep moving forward. Jake walked away with a sense of peace, knowing that he had made the right decisions for his company, but also acknowledging the cost. Ryan walked away with a renewed sense of purpose, realizing that sometimes letting go opens up new possibilities. Both of them understood that the past couldn't be rewritten, but as they moved forward, they carried with them the lessons they had learned along the way. They had been friends, partners, and now they were simply two people who had once shared something special. And that was enough.